I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to Messianic Insider. This is your theology and news roundup for July the 9th, 2025. Well, we are now back from the Messiah 2025 conference. I know many of you were doubtlessly missing Messianic Insider, but this is a once-in-a-year thing we go to. I'm sure many of you were keeping tabs on everything we were doing with the daily McKee Moment Editors logs from us leaving North Texas, visiting the relatives in northern Kentucky, the different cemeteries, being at the conference, and then returning home. So we are very glad to be back home. We connected with a lot of people at the conference. We received a lot of input. I will be reflecting on our different exchanges and experiences for the next month or so. And certainly, I would like to personally express my appreciation and gratitude. Those of you who were attending, you came to our exhibition table. You personally thanked me for doing Messianic Insider every day. And especially, we want to welcome those of you who are now joining us because you found out about Messianic Insider from Messiah 2025. So it was a good conference, and I'll be talking about some things at the conference over the next few weeks or so, particularly with subjects and questions which were raised. We know that the Messianic community is still emerging, it's still developing, and there's still a lot of questions about what it's going to become. Some conclusions are really good. Some conclusions, maybe not so much, but it's good to go to a broad Messianic event where you're going to encounter people from all across the spectrum. All right, so we definitely have to get back into the swing of things with Messianic Insider. Okay, so before we begin our theology roundup, I would encourage you to go to our website, messianicapologetics.net. And if you have not already, subscribe to the automatic blog notifications. You see it here in the right-hand column. Be automatically notified by email when Messianic Apologetics is updated. So just click there, put on your email, and then you'll be asked to confirm your subscription. So whenever we post something new or reintroduce something to the Messianic Apologetics website, that is how you get notified. Now, that's different from our email subscription list, which you can subscribe to. Just click on the envelope there. Those are things we have to specifically put together. So, for example, when we conclude today, this episode of Messianic Insider is archived up on the website. We'll send out a specific announcement with that list. But you certainly want to be able to be notified when we post things. We're definitely going into our archives and seeing that various posts are being reintroduced to our website. Okay, our theology roundup. What are we going to be discussing today? Well, specifically, and I actually looked in my archives from a few years ago with today's McKee Moments. I'd like to briefly describe, briefly talk about perhaps what are the three most important books on my contemporary theology. You know, many of us who are teachers and leaders, there have been some books, theological analyses, perhaps even a commentary, which have doubtlessly impacted our theology and worldview. And I do get asked this from time to time. A Along with that, some people want to know what makes you a little different from some of the other messianic voices out there. Well, this will give you some good ideas about why I am different, why I have the point of view I have regarding various issues. Okay, so all of the links we're going to be going through, whether it's for our theology roundup or later for our news roundup, of course, they will be listed when this episode is archived later today, messianicapologetics.net. So you can go and look through these things yourself in your free time. So we're going to start out with this resource. This is a mainstay of conservative biblical scholarship. And this has influenced me in more ways than I think even I know sometimes. And it's Introduction to the Old Testament by R.K. Harrison, or Roland Kenneth Harrison. Originally came out in 1969. Now, anyone who has been in the Messianic community for any period of time knows that one of our weaknesses as a movement involves the composition of the books of the Bible. I have definitely talked about that many, many times. When it comes to engaging with the critical tradition or liberal theology, we often do not know what to do. So if you get a resource like the Jewish Study Bible, you see references to JEDP, or you see references to 2nd Isaiah, 3rd Isaiah, whatever it is, we often don't know what to do about it. But yet, if you are in evangelicalism, if you're in Protestantism, whether it's conservative or liberal, you've got to engage with this. You don't have the luxury of just saying, well, those are all Christian ideas, even though they're not. You've got to engage with it. So Introduction to the Old Testament by Harrison, which is a mainstay in conservative, evangelical Protestant quarters for many decades. Of course, there are other more up-to-date Old Testament introduction books. This profoundly influenced me when I had to sort through some things when I was at Asbury Theological Seminary taking Old Testament introduction. And this is a resource which I would describe as being small c conservative. For example, it would uphold Mosaic oversight, so essential Mosaic authorship of the Torah, but not hopelessly so. While the JEDP hypothesis holds that the Torah was a compilation of different sources after the Babylonian exile, this is a resource which would argue that, yes, Moses oversaw the composition of the Pentateuch, yet Moses could have used ancient sources, ancient tablets from Mesopotamia passed down through the elders of ancient Israel. Certainly Moses didn't write about his own death, the last chapter of Deuteronomy. Mosaic authorship does not mean that Moses had to write down every single letter himself. He could have seen that scribes in the community of ancient Israel performed the work. And likewise, there could have been various levels of post-Mosaic editing by, among other figures, Ezra the priest. This is a small c conservative book. So while it's going to affirm a lot of things you and I will doubtlessly affirm, there's some things which may challenge you. This book does not affirm the James Ussher chronology, holding to a 6,000 year or so chronology for the human race on planet Earth. Many conservatives, myself included, don't adhere to that. We look at the genealogies of Genesis 5 and Genesis 11 as being telescoped. Doesn't mean one believes in evolution. It just means human civilization is older. This is a resource which does not espouse a Solomonic authorship of Ecclesiastes. Most conservatives do not believe Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes. I don't believe Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes. I think there are elements of Solomonic wisdom, but actually Ecclesiastes is the product of a court speaker in the southern kingdom. So there's some things like that which you will be challenged by in terms of introduction to the Old Testament. As I said, it's small c conservative. It's not big C conservative or fundamentalist like too many of us are used to encountering. But it's had a profound influence on my theology, a profound influence on how I look at the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and it's definitely a resource you all need in your local Messianic congregation or fellowship's library, if not in your own personal library. All right, the second book which has influenced me. This is not something you are likely to see referenced by too many people in today's Messianic community. And it's not the only book on this subject written by this author. It certainly is not the only book written on this subject matter. This came out in 2009, so it's almost 16 years old. Man and Woman, One in Christ, an exegetical and theological study of Paul's letters. This is not anything new, but John McKee is egalitarian. Okay, I have not hidden that from anyone. I absolutely believe that men and women are equal, that in the family, husband and wife are to be co-leaders of the family, and all major decisions are to be made by consensus. And I believe that in the assembly, you can see both male and female leaders as well. That is not a position you will hear in a great deal of the Messianic movement, although it's not universal. There are egalitarian people in the Messianic community. But there are those Bible passages which, well, what do we do about this? And what do we do about that? In particular, things like 1 Corinthians 11, 1 Corinthians 14, 1 Timothy chapter 2, and so on. Well, this is a study which represents a very robust egalitarian approach. And this continues to be one of the, I think, most significant resources out there by conservative evangelicals, simply because you believe in the equality of men and women and that women can be leaders, does not automatically mean that you are supporting LGBTQ. That is fear-mongering. But if you want to know what a robust defense of an egalitarian approach toward, for example, 1 Corinthians 11, Ephesians 5, whether or not 1 Corinthians 14, 34, and 35 are even authentic to Paul's letter or an interpolation, this is a book you have to read. And yes, as I get older, this is going to be much more of a sticking point for me and a lot of Messianic people. A lot of what the Messianic community has to say, and I've said this even in a recent newsletter about things like dating and courtship and marriage and child rearing, I'm broadly not interested in hearing about anymore. It's had 30 years. I'm going to go with something like this by Philip Payne. I'm going to go with the way I was raised by my parents, Kimball and Margaret McKee, and my Wesleyan upbringing, which, generally speaking, I think is better. Okay, and now the third, I think, most influential book on my theology, and this came out in 2014, so it's now 11 years old. And it is the book Navigating Genesis, A Scientist's Journey Through Genesis 1 through 11 by Hugh Ross of the ministry Reasons to Believe. Yeah, one of the most difficult aspects of the Holy Scriptures for today's Messianic community to sort through is Genesis 1 through 11. And almost always, at least in my experience, although I know there are exceptions because I was even approached, my parents and I were approached a number of years ago by a very high-ranking leader in the MJAA who talked with us about Genesis 1 through 11 and pretty much took our same approach. We don't have collectively as a Messianic community a good handle on being able to sort through different perspectives of Genesis 1 through 11. I mean, we don't. Most of what we hear is the young earth creation perspective, 6 24-hour days, 6,000 years ago, And if you deviate from that, you probably have compromised the Holy Scriptures and you believe in evolution. Yet there are many people out there who, while they don't believe in evolution, they've got questions about the greater universe. And they have issues with anybody who thinks that the greater universe is only 6,000 years old. They believe Adam and Eve were created by divine fiat and placed into the Garden of Eden somewhere in today's Middle East. But the universe, 6,000 years old, that's impossible to a lot of people. And to a lot of people who have seen some of the arrogance and some of the inflexibility of a number of those on the young earth creation side. And not to beat around the bush, I'm talking about people like Ken Ham and Answers in Genesis, or the Institute for Creation Research, among others. And they just, shove the Bible in people's face and like, now, wait a second, I've got questions about this. And you're telling me if I am sorting through these questions, I'm compromising the Word of God. Yet I'm looking at observable science out there, and I'm not buying what you're saying. A lot of people, if it were not for the old earth creation perspective of looking at the 6 Yamim as long periods of time, which this is a robust commentary, verse by verse, whether you agree with it or not. If you involve yourself in early Genesis controversies, you need to read this book. For a lot of people, if it were not for the old earth creation perspective, they would believe in evolution. I might believe in evolution because I find a lot of what some of the young earth leaders do to be so offensive sometimes in their attitudes and their inability to really want to engage with people. So this is something which has definitely influenced me. It's something I believe many of you need to read. And yes, it can be rare sometimes, but there are people in the Messianic community who support an old earth creation model, such as that promoted by Hugh Ross and Reasons to Believe. So I would have to say those are as of today at least, the 3 most influential books on my personal theology. And perhaps in the future, there will be some other books which influence me. We don't know at present. But they do represent some areas where I have found, and this is my opinion, the Messianic community to often be lacking. And yet evangelicalism is able to have that robust discussion. Judaism, I think, is able to have a much better discussion at times on these things than the Messianic community is. And of course, this will not be the last time we talk about these various matters. All right, so let's move on to our news roundup. And once again, all of the different stories I'm going to be going through, they will be listed when this episode is archived at MessianicApologetics.net. Now, for certain, right now, one of the stories which has dominated the headlines, and when we were at the Messiah Conference, I was able to keep up to speed with some things going on, but as you saw perhaps from the McKee Moment updates, there's just a lot of sitting down, and we have to be able to engage with people at the table. I would not have been able to go back to our room and have Messianic Insider there. The internet quality was very poor, and along with that, I wouldn't have been in the right frame of mind for what we went to the conference to do. But one of the ongoing news stories was the hill country, the flood in the Texas Hill Country, the Guadalupe River, Camp Mystic, and all those young campers who were killed. That is just tragic. Our thoughts and our prayers go out to that whole situation. I know there are going to be a lot of questions asked about it, and we'll see what comes up in the news cycle in the next few days. Most of the stories we go through in the news roundup are things which I encounter passively on social media, for those of you who are not aware of this. So it's going to be from sources like X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, and yes, some of you from time to time even direct message me with a story of interest. And they're not all about current events. whether it's Israel or whether it's Russia, Ukraine, or something else. Some of it involves things occurring in the religious world too. All right, so our first story, and this is something which came across my social media feed right before we left, and this is from Christians for Biblical Equality, CBE International. In the debate over men and women in ministry, male-female equality, you will doubtlessly be encountering some perspectives on the so-called spirit of Jezebel. Now, we all agree Queen Jezebel in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, was an evil woman. She left an example which is in the scriptures as something not to be repeated. But frequently, women who exercise various ministerial gifts and talents and skills, or they exercise various levels of leadership, can be chastised as operating in some so-called spirit of Jezebel. I've seen it for several decades. And what I think is to be noted about this is that it doesn't come from a lot of your complementarian Bible scholarship. It's not something which comes from the organization which tends to be the other one to Christians for Biblical Equality, Council of Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. That's a complementarian organization. I've got many disagreements with them, but they don't talk about some spirit of Jezebel. That is something which originates really from fundamentalist Christianity. And whether or not it has as biblical a basis as those who use it claim is going to be a huge question in the future. So this came across my post from CBE International. No, sister, you don't have a quote-unquote Jezebel spirit. To those sisters who suffer unjustly from fear, anxiety, rejection, self-doubt, limitations, and the full range of pain that comes from the false teachings about Jezebel, please hear this. You are not a tyrant for using your voice. You are not a seductress for wanting a place at the table. You are not rebellious for pursuing the call of God. You are not hurting the church by serving with your God-given gifts. Indeed, when you look at the example of Jezebel in the Tanakh scriptures, you see someone who is deeply involved in Canaanite, pagan idolatry, sexual immorality, and the murder of infants or the unborn. Later in the book of Revelation, you tolerate that woman Jezebel who calls herself a prophetess and causes my people to do what? Commit acts of immorality and eat meat sacrificed to idols. When it's time to reevaluate this and to give it a thorough treatment, we are going to have to account for some of the not only misleading points of view of baby boomers who preceded us, but we're going to have to get back to the text and say, well, they told me Jezebel was an evil, controlling woman. Instead, I see some kind of a pagan priestess type who is promoting sexual immorality and idolatry and all this. And it's not going to be very easy, especially in a heavy-duty complementarian to patriarchal light Messianic movement. But I did want to bring this out. And I repeat again, go look at a complementarian group like the Council of Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. Other than recognizing Jezebel as an evil queen whose example is to be heeded, they don't talk about some spirit of Jezebel. So what does that tell you about how poorly this subject has probably been approached by many, many people? Okay, most of our news is actually news, by the way. From open source intel yesterday, July the 8th. Netanyahu and Syrian President al-Shara are set to meet at the White House in September before the UN General Assembly, a Syrian source tells I-24 News. They are expected to sign a U.S. brokered security deal seen as a first step toward peace and normalization. That is huge, regardless of how people are approaching it in terms of the end time scenario. moving toward the state of Israel and Syria having a degree of normalization is huge. Of course, September is only 2 months away. Could this change? Yes, it could change, but we're going to start seeing some big changes hit the Middle East. All right, our next story from I-24 News English. And we know that right now, Netanyahu is in Washington. He met with President Trump yesterday, meeting with other high-level officials in the administration, the vice president, Speaker of the House. This is from yesterday. Netanyahu, President Trump and I believe in a doctrine called peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes the peace. His resolute decision to act with us against those who seek to destroy Israel and threaten world peace has made a remarkable change in the Middle East. So this visit by Netanyahu to Washington was largely involved with wanting to sort through, now that the Iranian nuclear program has been set back considerably, some would even say obliterated, what is next as the dust begins to settle, and what are we going to see happen? All right, from Disclose TV, although this is not the only place you've doubtlessly seen this, what about the whole Epstein files and the apparent Epstein client list? Trump, are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. Are people still talking about this guy? Do you want to waste the time? I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this. A lot of people are disappointed, very upset in President Trump for saying this. They're upset in the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. We've got a few other things to note on the whole Epstein question. From the New York Post yesterday, July the 8th, President Trump tore into Russian strongman Vladimir Putin Tuesday for talking bulls and making meaningless overtures while keeping his bloody invasion of Ukraine going. That's BS, by the way. Yeah, what is the situation in Russia, Ukraine going to be? Is the president going to be able to negotiate some kind of a ceasefire and some kind of a resolution to this matter? Or is the Russian government going to continue to push, and push? I don't know right now. All right, I thought this was interesting because I know many of you have heard the theory, we've talked about it before, that Prince Charles of Wales, of course now King Charles III, is in fact the anti-Messiah or Antichrist. You see that in a number of circles out there. I don't believe it, but I thought this was interesting. Buckingham Palace explained King Charles's bloodshot eye as he welcomed French President Emmanuel Macron for his 3-day state visit. The 76-year-old monarch was joined by Queen Camilla, Prince William, and Kate Middleton to greet Macron, who arrived in England Tuesday morning. So there you have it. Yeah, King Charles is not in the best of health. And while I think there is some reason to monitor the British royal family, other royal families, hey, could the beast come from this family? King Charles is going to die. And those who have labeled him to be the anti-Messiah or Antichrist are going to be proven wrong, and likely in the not too distant future. Okay, New York Post yesterday, July the 8th, and this involves the mayoral election in New York City. This is something to be really upset and distraught over. President Trump threatened Tuesday to use federal power to seize control of New York City if communist Zohran Mamdani is elected mayor. If a communist gets elected to run New York, it can never be the same. But we have tremendous power at the White House to run places where we have to, Trump told the Post during a cabinet meeting. What's going to happen regarding the New York mayoral election? I don't know, but the fact that you could see 25 years or so after 9/11, this kind of a man be a serious contender for the office of mayor. That says a lot about things. It says a lot about how people don't have a long-term attention span, and or how easily they can be spun and manipulated. I mean, this is a guy who thinks that Antifa is good. This is a guy who wants to, give out free this and free that. Who's going to pay for it? So he's not only a disaster when it comes to issues of Israel and Judaism, he's also just an economic disaster. Okay, I did think this was interesting. The New York Post slightly changed things a little bit. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s campaign to eliminate synthetic food dyes from the American food supply is facing stiff resistance from one of the country's most iconic candy makers, Mars, the manufacturer of M&Ms and Skittles. Well, I don't really eat Skittles. I haven't had Skittles for a really long time. I've always thought that they were just really artificial, but I do like M&Ms, especially peanut M&Ms or some of those others, once in a while. Yeah, we'll just see what happens. But I definitely support MAHA removing all these artificial chemicals and what have you from the food supply, especially when you can't really have them in Europe, among other places. Okay, this came across my social media feed. This is from yesterday, July the 8th. This is someone quoting the pre-tribulation rapture X channel. The rapture is coming soon, and we should all make sure we're ready for it. Being ready for the rapture is much simpler than you may think. In short, you must receive Jesus Christ as your Savior. The rapture is for believers. And I do have to note for you, when I was at the Messiah Conference and the presentation I gave, there were some people in there who were strong dispensationalists, pre-tribs. They came up to me afterwards. They were polite. I just had to tell them that, we have a different point of view, a different orientation toward some of the points they brought up. We've talked about them in various publications. But this person responding to this, quoting Marvin Rosenthal, who is actually kind of the father of the pre-wrath rapture view, which, as a post-tribulationist, I've got some issues with it, but the quote is spot on. To teach the church that it will not face the Antichrist is to prepare it to be deceived if it does. Amen to that. That's absolutely true. All right, this is from Charisma News. Whether you like Charisma News or not, I think a lot of people in the Messianic community do get a lot of information from it. Now, this is not the only source which has picked this up, but this is the first one I saw which came across my media feed. IRS confirms churches can officially endorse political candidates. How is that going to change American religion? Now, I try to be very pragmatic when it comes to candidates. For example, there are a lot of people I know, and I ran into them at Messiah 2025. They believe that Donald Trump is not just someone who was selected by God to do some important work for this phase of American history, world history. No, he is anointed by God with this and with this and with this. What I am concerned about with something like this, I do absolutely believe that those in religious settings can express political opinions. They can express, I support this candidate, I support that candidate. I don't have an issue with that. My issue is when support for a political candidate then becomes some kind of idolatry, because there are people out there, oh, Trump has got this anointing, Trump has got that anointing, whatever it is, and it can very quickly become not just MAGA on steroids, but Trumpolatry. God does not need us to have political freedom as wonderful as it is, in order to get his will accomplished. All right, so many of you are doubtlessly aware of how some statements were made by the president about the whole Jeffrey Epstein issue, presumed client list, etc. There are a lot of people who are finding themselves disappointed in the president and in the administration. They're very, very upset. What do you mean this is not what you had initially told us it meant? So, because we have free speech, this is from Amy Main, and her opinion, she's a Christian influencer. This is a shame and absolutely disgusting. And from her perspective, at least, what she's upset about isn't the politics of it. It's what about all of these victims? What about all these people who were abused, to say the least, among other terrible offenses? Now, because I try to take a longer-term approach, this dismissal by the president and the attorney general is going to get a lot of people to start asking questions about it. So where are we going to be with this subject in another week or in another 2 to 3 weeks? I just politely ask you to keep that in mind. Why is someone like Ghislaine Maxwell still in prison? Keep that in mind. So if you're upset, if you're disappointed that something hasn't been decisively done with the whole Jeffrey Epstein issue and now it's seemingly being dismissed, you have a right to that. I'm upset. I'm disappointed. But remember to keep this in more the long term as well, which is something we have seen with this president with other issues. What took place recently with the Israel-Iran conflict, what they're now calling the 12-day war. All right, so okay, so while we are perhaps disturbed and upset about the Jeffrey Epstein client issue, all of that, this is from Fox News, and this is from yesterday evening. FBI launches criminal investigations of John Brennan and James Comey, DOJ sources. CIA Director John Ratcliffe referred Brennan for criminal investigation to the FBI, sources told Fox News Digital. This is not the only source which has now picked this up. And it involves the Trump Russiagate issue going back to 2016. John Brennan, of course, is former CIA director. James Comey, former FBI director. This is, of course, huge, and this is massive, and what is going to come out of this? Former CIA Director John Brennan and former FBI Director James Comey are under criminal investigation for potential wrongdoing related to the Trump-Russia probe, including allegedly making false statements to Congress, Justice Department sources told Fox News Digital. So while a lot of you may be upset about the Epstein issue, we now have this Brennan-Comey issue. Okay, our next story, I was going to clear my throat. Excuse me. From the X channel, One Jewish State. We have a very strong alliance and Iran is weak. Watch Steve Witkoff. He is very talented, and I would watch the Abraham Accords closely. I think they will expand to a number of likely and less likely Muslim nations in the region. From David M. Friedman, who is the former ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Israel during the first Trump term. Yeah, this is the statement I find interesting. And I would watch the Abraham Accords closely. I think they will expand to a number of likely and less likely Muslim nations in the region. Of course, we are paying attention to Israeli-Syrian relations. And, you know, the big jewel of the Middle East everyone talks about is, will Israel have normalized relations with Saudi Arabia? But who else? We'll wait and see. This came across my feed on X. From Dr. Eli David, a friend just told me to check Zionism entry at Wokepedia. Of course, that's Wikipedia. I couldn't believe my eyes. All right, so the screenshot is fairly accurate, but just to confirm, let's go to Wikipedia directly. The entry on Zionism, of course, there's Theodore Herzl, and it says Zionism is an ethno-cultural nationalist movement that emerged in late 19th century Europe to establish and maintain a Jewish homeland through the colonization of Palestine, a region corresponding to the land of Israel and Judaism and central to Jewish history. Zionists wanted to create a Jewish state in Palestine with as much land, as many Jews, and as few Palestinian Arabs as possible. I think it's that last statement that really got him going, as few Palestinian Arabs as possible. Yeah, Wikipedia is not a reliable source for information. I know a lot of you all go to it. I know a lot of people in the Hebrew Roots movement certainly quote Wikipedia as though it's reliable. It's not. But it is going to demonstrate some perspectives involving the current Middle East situation, what we're going to see in terms of Israel, Palestine, whatever you want, whatever they're calling it now, which we don't particularly like. Okay, we've got 3 more stories. This is from My Charisma. Gateway Church welcomes new executive pastor. And this is from July the 9th, so this is from today. According to church leaders, Gateway Church has announced Nick Lesmeister as the new executive pastor. Previously, Lesmeister was the executive director of Gateway Center for Israel and was the church's global outreach executive pastor. Now, Gateway Church directly intersects with the Messianic Jewish movement, partially because of Gateway Center for Israel and also with the King's University, where a lot of new Messianic Jewish leaders are receiving an education. They were exhibiting just a few booths down from us at Messiah 2025. Now, also, while we were gone, there were some news stories talking about how Gateway is not doing too well economically. They're having to pull back the number of services while they go through the post-Robert Morris phase. What are we going to see from Gateway in the next 2 to 3 years? They've got this new pastor coming on board, Daniel Floyd. I know nothing about him other than he's from another megachurch. Nick Lesmeister, who was in charge of the Gateway Center for Israel. Now he's taking on a new position. Where's Gateway going to be in the next 2 to 3 years? And what's going to happen to entities like Gateway Center for Israel or the King's University? I don't know. From Open Source Intel, and this is from earlier today, July the 9th, Syria's Ahmed al-Shara met with the Israeli National Security Advisor Zaki Hanegbi in Abu Dhabi. Al-Shara reportedly ceded the Golan Heights to Israel in exchange for support to remain in power. 3 demilitarized zones will soon be established in southern Syria: Daraa, Quneitra, and Sueda. Hope I pronounced those properly. All heavy weapons will be evacuated from the Syrian army barracks in the south of the country. The Syrian army and police will only be allowed to carry light weapons in the demilitarized zone, per Al-Madin sources. Okay, so are we going to see in the not too distant future total normalization between Israel and Syria? Israel basically gets to keep the Golan Heights. What's going to happen? I don't know. These are the kinds of things which can change, as we know from recent weeks. But there are a lot of people who, on the one hand, probably need to calibrate their prophetic enthusiasm. Yes, that was a line. Calibrate your enthusiasm from Andor, the Star Wars series. All right. But they need to hold back on some of their prophetic, quote unquote, enthusiasm and just let these things naturally play out in the coming weeks and months. But we are going to see a different Middle East now that this 12-day war is concluded. And our last story, and this is something which came up just as I was getting everything together. This is from End Time Headlines. which can be a little sensational, but I thought this was important to note. Experts are predicting that humanoid robots will live among us and be so normal that up to 1 billion of them will be among us within the next 15 years. What could go wrong with this? Indeed, I know that there are a lot of people who interpret things, particularly in the book of Revelation, about this, multi-horned beast or that particular symbol, rather weird in some ways, which I find uncomfortable and even quite sensational. But the issue of artificial intelligence, robots, androids, whatever it is, that does raise a lot of questions about how long the Lord is going to let humanity go without directly intervening, okay? Because some of the androids, robots you see out there, they don't look too different from humans. They can't easily be distinguished from humans to the point where maybe they even have an artificial pulse. Of course, those of us who have watched science fiction, we've watched Star Trek. Of course, we've got Data on Star Trek. Even in the 1960s Star Trek, they had androids in some of the episodes. But Data from the Next Generation, Star Wars, we got C-3PO, R2-D2, other droids, some of them not looking as natural than others, but the whole idea is you've got these artificial entities who are moving around, right? And they're performing functions. How much of that are we going to see in the coming years? And indeed, does it have direct end-time influence? Does it have indirect? We've got to stay up to date, and we've got to be able to monitor these things. All right, so that concludes our news roundup. And I'm so glad to be back with you after attending the Messiah 2025 conference. I'm looking forward to the second half of 2025, what the Lord has in store for us. We're definitely going to be discussing more important issues, some of them controversial. Messianic Insider is all about staying up to speed with not only affairs of our own Messianic faith community and the unique destiny the Lord has for us, but being aware of how it intersects with God's prophetic end-time plan and the kingdom work he has for us. And a wide number of the issues we discuss, a lot of Messianic leaders, a lot of teachers, they're unwilling to engage with. So, as I like to say, I'm very grateful and appreciative of those of you who join us in our ongoing conversation. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and donations toward all of our ministry efforts. You can donate online at outreachisrael.net/support. And your giving is greatly appreciated during the summer months where things do noticeably slow down a little bit. We'll see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.